الأمن والسلام العالميين مهددان بضغطة زر واحدة.
Cybercrime is a real threat to governments, to companies, to individuals, because to commit a crime or to attack someone, you no longer need to be physically close to them. You can do it from any point in the world to any other point in the world through the internet, and that's what makes cybercrime so dangerous.
It's a very lucrative business that is illegal, that's opting for information gathering or simply for financial goals.
Cybercrime is a virtual hostage taking, using the same principles like a hostage taker. High demands, no cooperation.
And the same way you need to protect yourself against crime in the real world, you have to protect yourself from cybercrime in the online world.
It can simply stop your business operations. So nobody wants to lose their data, nobody wants to just simply stop functioning and do their basic business activities.
It will be the most dangerous threat to the world in the future because it's covered by governments and there is no real action against these cybercriminals.
العالم ليس على ما يرام. جيوش خفية لا تنام. هجماتها عنوانها الانتقام. تضرب أنظمة الأغصان، وعندما تدرك أنك مهاجم يكون قد فات الأوان.
The power of a cyber attacker is that they have tools that can actually cause physical harm, financial gain, political harm, reputational harm to organizations and individuals alike.
It is really pretty inexpensive to be a hacker. To acquire the tools and the capabilities is pretty expensive, and it doesn't cost very much to launch an attack. So hackers have a big advantage because it's much more expensive and much more difficult to defend.
The power of hackers is huge. It really depends who they're gonna pick as a target and what's the value behind it. One of the most important motives nowadays is a financial motive. So if there is no money behind, then why someone should choose that particular company as a target? Maybe in order to gather some information. If so, then it's a targeted attack. And when we are discussing here targeted attacks, that's the power of hackers. Yet someone is able to gather information about us as much as they can in order to manage to get inside.
Bad news and good news. Bad news, you have to pay the money. Good news, you will always get the hostage back alive.
ترسانات رقمية وتهديدات دولية. إنها الحرب السيبرانية. باستخدام حاسوب وبعض البرامج المتاحة للشراء في السوق الإلكترونية السوداء يمكن تنفيذ عمليات أمنية شديدة التعقيد في الفضاء الإلكتروني.
There are a lot of different types of cyber attacks out there, and the type of attack that's typically used depends on the objective of the cyber attacker.
Everybody is at risk. It is easy for me as an attacker to go out and use technology to find vulnerabilities. And then once I find all the people that are vulnerable, I can look in there and say, who has the most money or who has what I want? And then they become my target.
الأهداف مواقع حيوية ومصنفة في خانة الأمن القومي للدول المستهدفة. شبكات كهرباء، سدود مائية، مستشفيات، بنوك والعديد من الأهداف مهددة على مدار الساعة بهجمات سيبرانية.
Yeah, hackers have both technical and psychological or social skills. They've gotten very good with phishing emails or things they might send you in a text or things that they put in Facebook. All of this, they understand it's very much, while it's a technical set of tools, they're very much working on your mind, right? They're trying to change your behavior. They're trying to get you to take an action that is beneficial to them. And they know it's just not the technical part. They have to understand how your mind works and they have to get to your decision-making process.
And phishing, actually, it's the #1 attack that we are dealing with nowadays. Actually, it's over 60% of attacks that are actually happening through phishing. Another type of an attack might be related with social engineering, where someone is trying to physically get us into something. There might be a person getting into a building, there might be a person even dropping a pen drive in front of our building. So these are the attacks that we are experiencing. The major goal, obviously, is to get access to our system. So either we're going to do it through technology or we're going to do it through a human.
بلغ عدد مختلف هجمات البرمجيات الخبيثة حول العالم خلال عام 2020 5 مليارات و600 مليون هجوم، شكلت منها هجمات الفدية 304 ملايين محاولة.
Hackers are a very interesting group, I think, from a social background and a psychological background. There's a certain level of I have to prove I can do this and I can get to you. And some of them are just motivated by the hack. The money is almost incidental. And so it's a very interesting set of motivations. It's the I'm really technically smart, but I can also make money. And so that makes them very dangerous.
These organizations are very professional. They are friendly, they are respectful, they talk in a very educated way, and they start this negotiation by telling you what they want, which is always a lot of money and no cooperation. It's interesting because they know exactly the right amount of money, because they have analyzed the company before, very often for 5 or 6 months, so they know exactly the revenue, they know the profit, they know all the figures, very often better than the own manager as his company.
ما هي خطورة ونتائج الهجمات السيبرانية على الأمن العالمي؟ كيف تتم عمليات التسلل والاختراق؟ وأي دول في قفص الاتهام؟ من هم المدافعون والمفاوضون خلال الهجوم وبعده؟
If our world is unfortunate enough to get into World War III or another major conflict, that a lot of that conflict is going to happen in cyberspace. And countries that aren't used to being attacked directly can now be attacked directly through cyberspace. And so that's going to change the dynamic of warfare. The United States is probably the most attacked country worldwide for 2 reasons. I think geopolitically, we have call them competitors, so we may call them enemies, but Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, we have significant differences with those countries, and they can't really compete with us in physical space, but they can reach out and attempt to harm us in cyberspace. Then the other reason the United States is the most attacked is because we have the largest economy. The most money is here. So for the criminals, this is where they're going to come because this is where the money is.
شغل اللواء المتقاعد في القوات الجوية الأمريكية بريت ويليامز قبل تقاعده منصب مدير العمليات في القيادة السيبرانية بين أعوام 2012 و2014. ملفات سرية للغاية ومصنفة في خانة الأمن القومي الأمريكي عمل عليها اللواء ويليامز خلال خدمته التي دامت 33 عاماً.
Our team was first very focused on the intelligence. What did we see the attackers doing? And we looked at mostly nation-state attackers and nation-states that were looking to impact our government or impact our military, or nation-state attacks that were looking to impact our commercial sector, particularly things like critical infrastructure, electricity, water, telecommunications, transportation. And so our job was first to understand what the attackers were doing, what their tactics were, and then to devise ways to defeat them. We have a variety of ways to defend the United States against cyber attacks. We do a lot of work from the government side with the Department of Homeland Security, working with the private sector to make sure that they have the intelligence they need, to advise them on the best types of techniques to defend themselves. And then inside the government, we have 2 things that are very important to defending our country that don't exist in the private sector. First, we have access to intelligence in the government that in the private sector you don't have access to that same intelligence. And then the other thing we can do in the government is we have the authority and the capability to reach out and go back at the attackers and hopefully be able to make their job harder.
لم تعد الحروب السيبرانية بين الدول أمراً خافياً على أحد، فمن هي الجهات المتصارعة؟ وما هي أساليبها وأهدافها؟
The United States is primarily focused on 4 nation states who have shown a willingness to reach out and harm the United States in cyberspace. China, theft of intellectual property; Russia, who's looked to create additional political dissent and also position themselves strategically; Iran, who has attacked the United States financial system as well as other interests; and North Korea, which has attacked the United States. So all of these countries, we have differences of opinion, and that's the way that they can try to impact us. And then we have a number of criminal groups and terrorist groups that we also focus on who tend to operate in cyberspace. Countries like China and Russia, where we see collaboration between the governments and the people that work as criminal groups. And for us, that makes it a very difficult problem because the state helps these criminals conduct this cybercrime for a variety of reasons.
سرقة ملفات أمنية مصنفة سرية للغاية، تلاعب مفترض في نتائج الانتخابات الرئاسية، تفجيرات وتعطيل مفاعلات نووية. هذه المعلومات تم تداولها في وسائل الإعلام، أما المخفي منها فنتائجه كارثية.
Several recent high-profile attacks, the Colonial Pipeline, the attack against the meat processing plant, but these are just the latest in a long series. What I find annoying is people go, is this a wake-up call? You should have already been awake a long time ago. What this shows is that people continue to not take cybersecurity seriously. In all of those attacks, what we've seen reported afterwards is more often than not, it was a pretty simple cybersecurity issue that allowed the attack to start. And so people have to stop waiting to be attacked before they take this seriously, and they've got to be proactive.
ذكر مكتب التحقيقات الفيدرالي FBI في تقرير له أن الهجمات السيبرانية في الولايات المتحدة ارتفعت نسبتها ب300% منذ بداية جائحة كورونا. 27% من هذه الهجمات استهدفت القطاع المصرفي والصحي، مما أدى إلى خسائر مالية فادحة. تتعاون جهات أمنية متعددة في الولايات المتحدة للتصدي والتحقيق الجنائي السيبراني بعد الهجوم المفترض من أجل ملاحقة المتسللين ومحاسبتهم.
After Colonial Pipeline's quick notification to law enforcement and pursuant to a seizure warrant issued by the United States District Court for the Northern District of California earlier today, the Department of Justice has found and recaptured the majority of the ransom Colonial paid to the Dark Side network.
Today, the FBI successfully seized criminal proceeds from a Bitcoin wallet that DarkSide ransomware actors used to collect a cyber ransom payment from a victim. Since last year, we've been pursuing an investigation into DarkSide, a Russia-based cybercrime group.
وفق إحصاءات شركة بروف بوينت، فإن 88% من الشركات في العالم تعرضت في العام 2019 لنوع من أنواع القرصنة، لكن 5% فقط من هذه الشركات محصنة بشكل جيد ومنيع.
So JBS Foods is another really hot recent example of a ransomware attack. Now in this scenario, the ransom amount was $11 million that they paid. Now here you have a large organization that's manufacturing food products, for the world, right? Again, people wouldn't usually associate a food product company as a critical infrastructure company, but think about that. Food is something that every human being needs, so hitting that at the heart means it is a critical infrastructure kind of business. So again, a large organization, very, very well known, multiple countries around the world, yet they didn't have the necessary foundational security in place to be able to protect against ransomware, and paid $11 million as a ransom.
Zero Trust Security مصطلح تقني في مجال الأمن السيبراني يتم تطبيقه من خلال تجهيز الشركات بالمعدات والبرامج المتطورة بهدف خلق نوع من المناعة السيبرانية تبقيهم بمنأى عن المتسللين وطالبي الفدية. أفيناش أدفاني، مؤسس ومدير شركة متخصصة في الأمن السيبراني، تعمل مع جهات حكومية والعديد من الشركات الخاصة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وأوروبا.
There are a lot of different outcomes of a potential cyber attack or a breach because it really depends on the objective of the attacker and the type of breach. Let's take ransomware as a simple example. You can either pay the ransom, you can either not get infected by the ransomware, you can either restore from backup if you've done it properly, or you just let it all go and rebuild from scratch, right? And whatever consequences come from there. So what we do is obviously try to recommend to the organization where they should take action. We'd never recommend that they should pay the ransom unless they absolutely have to, because 80% of all customers that pay ransom get hit again by ransomware, right? Again, if the company has got the right controls in place, they may be able to prevent ransomware completely. If, for example, it is targeted and it gets on the machine due to a social engineering or phishing attack, then if they have the right backup strategy, they can revert the data and not lose too much. Finally, if they don't have a lot of controls in place, but they don't want to pay the ransom, they can just not do anything and restart from scratch and rebuild. But of course, there are a lot of consequences associated with that.
ورد اتصال هاتفي من أحد عملائه أخبره بأن جميع ملفات الشركة تم تشفيرها وهم غير قادرين على الوصول إليها بتاتا. جمع أفيناش فريقه بشكل سريع، قيموا الوضع الأولي وناقشوا خطط العمل لصد الهجوم الذي لم تتضح معالمه بعد.
We'll get on an initial exploratory call with the customer to understand how the attack happened from their perspective, what they've seen, what they've observed, what alerts they've seen, and really just try to understand what the current state of the attack is and where the attacker potentially could be in their environment. From that moment, we then decide as an advisory company, do they need a compromise assessment? Do they need an incident response service? Or are there just controls that can be put in motion today that can action the breach and solve the problem?
احتمالات وفرضيات عديدة يمكن أن تكون السبب وراء هذا الهجوم. كل دقيقة تمر يتسلل المخربون فيها أكثر فأكثر إلى ملفات الشركة المستهدفة. قصد أفيناش مكتب شركة متخصصة في مجال الاستجابة الفورية للهجمات السيبرانية يتعاون معها لمعرفة تفاصيل أكثر عن هذا الهجوم ومحاولة احتوائه.
Based on the phone call you gave me earlier, I've already spun up the team. We have Jace here setting up our incident response and compromised lab. So he's going to already work with the point of contact that you've given us.
Okay.
He'll be deploying tool sets, start capturing malware, and start trying to identify if exfiltration occurred and what the potential root cause was and the malware family.
Fantastic.
On top of that, I've engaged our cyber threat intelligence cell.
Okay.
We're already looking at malware particular that targets your customer's vertical.
Yep.
So we're going after those families right now to pre-identify anything we can.
Good.
I also have searches going on onto the web and to the underground, looking for any chatter about your customer or that vertical.
Essentially then, with this team here, if we understand if data has been taken out and if there are any other activity that looks similar to other ransomware attacks, we might be able to then help the customer remediate swifter or quicker, right?
Because what we want to identify is if it's a targeted or a opportunistic attack.
Okay.
If we see pre-existing chatter, that tends to lead toward a targeted.
Okay.
If we don't, and we see chatter about the vertical, that could be opportunistic. On top of that, I've engaged our analyst here, MJ, and he's currently doing a digital footprint of your client to see if there's any exposed assets that could have been used as a beachhead.
Got it.
That then furthers the hypothesis that this is an opportunistic event.
Understood.
We then take that back to CTI, Cyber Threat Intelligence, to see if there's linkage between that exposed endpoint and any chatter for sale or credentials that have been exposed.
So if it's a targeted attack, does that mean that the attacker could have been lying dormant and sleeping inside the environment for a while and then only targeting the sensitive data at one shot with ransomware?
Correct, because they've been able to identify, they've done their recon, they know where to target.
Okay.
So after everything's said and done here, the last thing we do is we do a threat hunt in the environment.
Nice.
To look for any lingers or any sleepers to engage cleanup positions. So we contain, we eradicate, we clean up, then we recover.
بعد ساعات من العمل، تمكن الفريق التقني من معرفة نوع هجوم الفدية الذي تعرضت له الشركة. لا تخدعنكم المظاهر، خلف هذا الوجه الجميل قصص شيقة وفريدة تروى للمرة الأولى. باولا يانوسكيفيتش، مصنفة كواحدة من أهم وأخطر الخبراء السيبرانيين العالميين في مجال اختراق وفحص الشبكات، بالإضافة إلى التحقيق الجنائي السيبراني بعد وقوع الاختراق المفترض.
So penetration tester is a person who is delivering attacks to the infrastructure legally upon agreement with a certain organization, and the penetration tester is acting exactly like a hacker, as a hacker would, but performing the activities that at the end will allow a certain company to grow and be better in cybersecurity. So what makes a difference in between a cyber criminal that is performing the hacker activities versus legal hacker? It's simply ethics.
بالإضافة إلى تعاونها مع شركة مايكروسوفت، أسست باولا شركتها الخاصة وتعمل مع فريقها على عدد كبير من المحاور التقنية الحساسة.
The cybercrime can be stopped by cybersecurity awareness. So the more we know how the attacks are performed, the more we understand them, the better means of protection we are able to implement. What is also important to have a look at, it's the focus of what kind of operations are related with cybersecurity. So the more support cybersecurity gets within the company, the better. In order to identify a hacker in our organization, you need to have a well-designed, well-implemented monitoring system. That involves discovering the anomalies, for example, that are related with identities and how these identities are used across our servers, workstations, and so on. So if there is a certain user that logs into the server A, then that really won't happen that this user will log in into the server B. So discovering this kind of anomalies, it's called intelligent threat detection, and that is a direction that companies should be moving into.
كيف تقوم باولا يونسكيفيتش بهذه الاختراقات؟ وهل يوجد من يردعها؟
Cyber forensic is a very important branch of cybersecurity because it focuses not only on the investigation after the attack, but also on the collection of the evidence in order to understand what actually happened. It allows you to pinpoint points of entry so that they will never be the same again for the certain company. And then we are able to learn what were our mistakes in the past so that we are able to become more secure in the future. One of the most interesting projects that I've participated in was actually happening lately, where there was a certain company that was infected by ransomware. They have encrypted literally like almost all of their resources, and this was a set of factories that were spread all around the world, so they just simply had to stop. And my job was there to recover, or to help them to recover, but also I spent some time on figuring out how that ransomware worked in order to help them to recover data that couldn't be decrypted by the ransomware decryptor that they unfortunately paid for. So that is a good example of forensic work where I learned how together with the team the ransomware decryptor works so that we managed to recover 100% of their data. And the point of entry was similar to the Colonial Pipeline attack because this was through the contractor's account. So the attack wasn't directly through the resources of that company, but it was related also with the external company that was supporting them in their IT actions.
صنفته مجلة فوربس العالمية كواحد من أفضل المفاوضين في العالم. تدرب وعمل في الشرطة مع مكتب التحقيقات الفيدرالي الأمريكي FBI ل17 عاماً. عاش 6 سنوات متخفياً بين عصابات الشوارع. طور خلالها معرفته بأساليب التفاوض تحت الضغط. ماتياس شرانر مفاوض سيبراني عالمي من الطراز الرفيع والنادر.
Hi Anna.
Hi Matthias, we have just received a call from a client. You will have to come to the office immediately.
Okay, I'm on the way. Thank you. Hackers, they operate very professionally. First step, they shut down the system and they hand over a telephone number or an email address, making sure you can contact them immediately. And most clients, they underestimate this danger, so they try to avoid this negotiation, which is always wrong. You need to contact them immediately because time is not on your side. You need to start this negotiation immediately. So you reach out to this number or to this email, usually get a password, making sure you are the right one calling this organization, and then they tell you what they want. We got a new case and we need to analyze this case immediately. It would be great if you could focus on the company and on the contact person, and we need to know what's going on in social media.
أسس شركته التي تختص في التفاوض مع أخطر المتسللين السيبرانيين في أهم القضايا السرية والمعلنة. في جعبته أكثر من 500 قضية تفاوض سيبراني حول العالم. لنكتشف مع ماتياس شرانر عالم التفاوض بين المتسللين والشركات المستهدفة.
So after receiving this demand, it's important not to commit yourself at the beginning, because there's always a lack of information. So you should never say no, you should never say yes, and very important, you should not try to convince them that it's illegal and they shouldn't do it. So you need to negotiate with these cyber criminals, and the first thing what you do, you ask for a so-called proof of life. You hand over a homework for them to restore the most complicated element of your IT system. After getting this proof of life, after making sure they are the right one and they are able to restore the system, then you start to negotiate the amount of money. Right now we support a client with a huge online business. They are under attack because the organization, they shut down the entire online business, so they can't sell the product, they can't send invoices, they are completely out of the business, and they will lose millions per hour. And this is what we do right now. We negotiate with this organization to get the business back to normal, because not paying is not an option and waiting is not an option. Time is never on our side. So thank you for joining this call. It's important to get a lot of information. We need to know everything about what we have experienced so far. So when did you receive the call?
Received the call 2 hours ago.
Okay, what is the amount? How many millions do they want?
They want exactly 15 million.
15 million. When do they expect the payment?
2 days from now.
2 days from now, okay. And any other information regarding the criminals?
No, we got the call from an unknown number, so we don't have the phone number, we don't have an email address, nothing.
So this was the first conference call with our client. We need to stay in contact from now on very closely. So we do have a meeting every hour because we need to get all the necessary information. Because this is what we need to know to prepare our negotiation strategy. So now I'm going to meet my client in a restaurant, because this is the only possibility to make sure that the cyber criminals cannot listen to our conversation. Usually you pay the money in cryptocurrency, so you need to get the money prior to the deal. And this is not easy, because you can't transfer millions of dollars into cryptocurrency at once, so you need to be prepared. After reaching an agreement, you get a bank account, then you transfer the money, and then they restore the system immediately. And they offer a helpline, 24-hour helpline. So if you do have any issues with your system, you could call the helpline and they will help you. The next client will call us, and if the next client would get this feeling we can't trust these organizations, then they won't pay. This is why they need to make sure that the system will be back to normal after reaching an agreement.
تعددت الأساليب والهجمات السيبرانية واحدة. دول تهاجم ودول تدافع قبل أن تهاجم من جديد. الجريمة السيبرانية، حرب الألفية الحالية.